So, where we're at so far in this semester sounds like we've got some writing in on introduction and or literature review as one chapter in this case, or two if you decide to split them out, and some writing 4 pages or so on materials and methods. Awesome. And where do we go from here with it? So to recap for the recording, if part of the work has already started, which is very, very common for master's students, write that part in past tense, because it doesn't help that committee meeting if stuff is written in future tense but you've been doing it for months. Help your committee understand what the real situation is, and as you move into the parts that are written in future tense, as you have a chance to get into them, you would edit that forward and make notes as you go, right? Since the beginning of the semester, we've been curating those research notebooks, those log books, those field data entry forms, and so forth. All of the little notes that get written in the margin are scrawled, like what coordinate reference system are we using for collecting these GPS centroids, and so forth. All of those details really do matter, and that stuff goes into materials and methods. It gets mentioned so that folks have a clear understanding of what you've actually done. If you are collecting some of your data in NAD 83 and for some reason you had to switch to NAD 27 at some point during analyses to bring in a whole bunch of historical data and do some compare contrast against stuff like that, then it's really important to know that that coordinate transformation is happening, because for some research projects, either one is close enough. Like they're halfway close, within a couple of meters on most of the surface of the Earth. But sometimes you really need to know within that sort of margin of error in converting between NAD 83 and NAD 27, or WGS 84, or whatever. This becomes particularly important to capture that stuff as you go, and never, ever, ever trust yourself to just remember it. You won't. Nobody else does, and none of us are superheroes, so just write it all down. And whatever you guys decide to figure out with converting the workflow from one coordinate reference system to another, just write it down. And throw that in your research notebook. In helping my wife edit this dissertation and so forth, there were multiple times where I had to go back through to some of her research notebooks which were several years old, and we had no recollection of doing those things, but it's all recorded in detail, and it makes the conversation you're about to have at the end of this process, your thesis, seminar, and defense, a million times easier. Because if anybody asks you any questions during that defense, and you have sort of faithfully carried forward all of those details, like small details, like what's the dosage of this experimental drug in this dissertation, 10 milligrams per kilogram, what was the dilution factor stock, and what was it diluted to in the field, what did you use to dilute it, and so on and so forth. Like that level of detail is what you want to be capturing and put into your methods and so forth, because this is the level of detail that anybody else would need to legitimately replicate your work, or to check it, or extend their own study forward off of your hard work. It does need that level of detail. So it's super easy to just write that stuff down. Be super anal about writing stuff down as you go, and then that removes all the stress, all of it, of having to remember anything. And especially when you're in your defense, you got a bunch of old scientists at the top of their careers and stuff like that, asking you questions about your thesis. Maybe you're nervous and stuff like that. If you have it all written down, it is a fair answer to say, I'm pretty sure I said something about that in the methods. Let's flip to that real quickly. You don't have to be Johnny on the spot with information. If it's in your thesis, you don't have to memorize it. And that's the whole point. Like anything that's in your head but not in your thesis, nobody else knows that exists. So We can't make any assumptions and fill in any gaps in our understanding with stuff that you haven't told us. So, yeah, capture details just makes writing easier as you go. How are you guys doing in the process of moving from kind of that outline level, top level headings, chapter headings, section headings, underneath that, 1 indent in and then 2 indents in, maybe subsection headings and then 3 indents in, like a phrase or a word or a sentence fragment that you'll turn into, each of those into a sentence a little bit later. Where are you guys in that process? Are you up to writing paragraphs out of those? Are you just throwing in outline bullet points? Where are you at?
Writing a paragraph.
Awesome. Cool. Okay.
Is there any way, that you could upload a couple of, or at least one, thesis or proposals that we could look at?
Yeah.
So we could, because I feel like I'm writing, but I'm not sure if I'm writing it correctly or if they're already on D2L, being able to access them, just so I can get an idea of how it's written correctly instead of just kind of putting stuff down and be like, I hope this is right.
Sure. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a look for those.
Language, and I feel like I have the format pretty decently. I'm just worried about the language because I just feel like I'm writing it too what is it, layman, where it's just not super scientific.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So that is a very normal sensation. Totally. And as soon as you start incorporating some of those details, we switched from NAD 83 cores 96 to WGS 84 for whatever the reason, doesn't even matter. You just say that you did it. Talking about coordinate reference system switches, that's already way above, most people don't even know that's a thing. So if you feel oh my gosh, this feels so ratchet basic, as the youth say, a little bit too colloquial or informal or whatever, as you start putting in, meaningful levels of detail, you automatically go right to where you need to. So I wouldn't sweat that too much. Whoa, okay.
Sometimes just having it concise is better. I sometimes get told that I don't know what
Okay. Yeah, so further to your question, we'll have some versions of theses and dissertations up here. And the instinct is often to take the 4 pages you've written for method so far and compare that to somebody else's 25-page long method section and be like, oh man, I'm 15% of the way done. I need to get to 24 pages too. No, that is not the case. Say what you need to say for your project, and if it is more than somebody else's, fine. If it's a quarter of somebody else's, fine. As long as somebody else could take what you did, and if they have the same equipment, start replicating your study the next day. That's functional. That's technical writing. And you'll note that all of these are going to become journal articles sooner or later, right? They don't live as theses forever. But they do get edited down heavily for length. So if you feel man, this is super short, look at the method section on any of the journal articles that you're relying on. Is that even 4 pages long? Probably not. A lot of method sections for studies with relatively standard techniques, it could be a couple of paragraphs or several paragraphs total, less than a page in a journal article format. So all of this to say, length is completely arbitrary. Some journal articles, 80% of it is methods because it's a new method and nobody else has any idea what's going on with it. A lot of the publications around AI these days are just pages and pages of methods, and they might have like a single figure, several paragraphs of like results or discussions, because the method is the point. So whatever your study is, it's going to dictate length and the detail level which to your communicating stuff. If you're using completely standard techniques, like if you're using absolutely standard parametric one-way ANOVAs straight through, and students t-test, two very, very common forms of statistical analyses. The statistical analyses paragraph in your thesis might just be a paragraph, because tens or hundreds of thousands of people have used one-way ANOVAs and students t-tests, and nobody needs you to re-explain all that stuff in crazy detail. It's just a very standardized thing. So there you go. Hopefully that helps kind of allay any concerns. This is like every year we have this conversation of, all right, how many pages? But how many pages really? Like, when do I stop? When is it enough? Don't pay any attention to page count, just say what you need to say. All right, let's see, thesis template files and walkthrough. Let's see if we've got any examples for there. And this one that we are looking at right here on the other screen, let's see, right there. I'll upload a copy of this. This is freshly written. We finished it on Friday. Finished the editing pass on Friday. It's about 180 pages with a whole bunch of data tables. You're not going to be writing 180 pages in your thesis or dissertation. Okay, so yeah, there's Kevin Turnbow's from a while back, and it's just the outline level stuff, right? We use Microsoft Word in a previous example of the class to do a bunch of the templating and so forth, and so-called ipsum lorem text to just get a sense of, is it okay if I just have one theory paragraph for theory number one? Yeah, sure. Whatever you need to explain. If you need more than that, use more. If you need one sentence to reference this theory, just use the one sentence and move right on. Okay? Cool. Sorry. So, with the writing process, at this stage, as you are moving from bulleted outline points, if you are composing new stuff, drop back to bullet points is typically the more successful approach than trying to write a whole bunch of sentences and paragraphs and stuff from scratch. So doing a content adding pass of getting ideas out of your head and out of your field notebook into the outline in the specific appropriate spot. And then in a separate pass, going away, doing something else, working on field work, then coming back and writing sentences out of those bullet points, way, way, way less cognitive load on you than doing it sort of staring at a blank page on the screen and starting at writing paragraphs. The reason is so-called cognitive context switching. So information transplantation from your field notebook to your thesis, like outline, that's a whole set of cognitive processes. It's a different part of your brain to take content and string it together narratively into sentences and paragraphs and pages and sections and chapters and theses. So when your brain has to switch back and forth from transplanting information and just making sure that this detail about WGS84 is in my method section, specifically in the field data collection protocol part, because we had to set the GPS to collect, according to that coordinate reference system. You mentally have to stop, and it's a process of milliseconds, but it takes quite a bit of mental energy and focus, and we have a finite sort of budget of willpower each day, as it turns out, on a kind of a neurological level. And in switching back and forth from information transplantation to prose writing, you pay a little bit of a tax to make that switch back and forth. And if it's that switch, every sentence of, okay, I need to get this information in here and I'm going to compose it as a sentence, you're paying that tax, you're spending extra effort for not extra output. It's absolutely exhausting. So a lot of folks have found more efficient success, more sustainable pace and success by doing each step discretely from others. This discrete step process in the editing phase of your proposal is also really, really apparent. So it's absolutely incredibly exhausting to go scroll back up to beginning of introduction to literature for this example, and talking about the epidemiology of traumatic brain injury. With editing passes, typically you want to do one pass to, like, a very common mistake is to the last sentence of each paragraph can lose its period. I don't know why, but everybody does this. As you're writing prose, you just forget to put in the period on the last sentence of any particular paragraph. So, after you're done writing and you're pretty happy with the content, then you go through and you just, without even really reading through, you just look at the last sentence in each paragraph and check, does it have a period? And so forth. Question? Yeah?
So I was taught in high school not to have a citation at the end of a sentence. Is that okay to have one? I was told it was like, it looked bad to have a citation as your last sentence of a paragraph.
Oh, okay.
So I've always stressed a lot about trying to figure out another sentence to put at the end of a...
Sure.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, so for the recording, the question was, is it okay to have a parenthetical, in this case, citation, ending a paragraph, as is here and here? And the answer is, it doesn't matter a whole lot. For people, in our case, we only care, literally only care about the opinions of the 3 people on your thesis committee. Anybody else's opinion, it's like an asshole. They've got it and it stinks, and we don't care. So, we just care about your advisor first and foremost, and secondarily, the other 2 people on the committee. And if your advisor doesn't say anything about it, then you don't have to say anything about it. One very easy way for somebody who does kind of raise a stink, so to speak, about having parenthetical citations at the end of the last sentence of a paragraph and kind of ending with that closed parentheses. One very easy way to tackle that is in your editing passes, because these parenthetical citations, these are all content, right? So you're doing a writing pass and you get all these cool citations wrangled from your annotated bibliography and from your sources and so forth, and you get all this stuff arranged into a pretty good narrative, and then the large part of your work is done. The easiest way to not end a paragraph with a citation like this is to write a transition paragraph from this paragraph, connecting it explicitly to the next paragraph. If your readers have to do any guesswork on why paragraph 2 comes after paragraph 1, then the right move always is to have a transition sentence. So for example, in this case, the first paragraph is about traumatic brain injury, just introducing the idea of it. What is it? There's a definition, which is very common, first or second paragraph kind of a thing in an introduction. Establishing some of the importance of it. It's a silent epidemic, blah, blah, blah. And there are new and expanding definitions of it and so forth. And therefore, because the need is urgent, because this is a widespread thing, because this is real harm to real people, penetrating head injuries, the search for therapeutics is ongoing as no standard of care exists to date. And a couple of studies identifying that need. So, the transition here is implicit. The first sentence of the next paragraph starts, in the United States, approximately 3 million people will suffer a mild traumatic brain injury each year. So in between those two cited facts, first, the search for therapeutics is ongoing, and second, in the United States, about 3 million people will suffer a mild TBI each year. There's a change in direction there, right? The first one is talking about, we're looking for the search in therapeutics, and then immediately, without any connecting language, 3 million people a year get traumatic brain injuries. So the move would be to write a brief sentence, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, of something to the effect of, in this case, the search for therapeutics is urgent because so many people suffer TBIs. And then the next paragraph, that transition sentence didn't add any new information, but it's very clear that we have paragraph B now because of paragraph A. So a lot of paragraph transition sentences will have the word thus, or therefore, or even just so. They're all the same thing. If A, then B. Therefore, thus, so, because of, very common wordings. Does that make sense? Okay, so, yeah, the first most economical move for your energy level to be protected is, if nobody says anything about it, you don't care either, The grad school to whom you're going to turn this in at the end for archiving and stuff like that, they don't care about the content. They just care about formatting. So if nobody on your committee raises a stink about it, not a big deal. Later on, you'll have a chance to edit this, chop it way down into a manuscript format with your advisor, typically after you graduate. And that'll be a time to, take a second look, because that list of reviewers, the associate editor for the journal, a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 blind reviewers for the journal and so forth, they might raise a stink about, you need better transitions. This doesn't flow well, is the feedback that you get. Like, I can't figure out why paragraph B came after paragraph A in the same section. So the outline, if this is a concern, you put that transition sentence right in there. So if it's, let's see, introduction, we have a broad context paragraph, and then within that, fact 1, citation 1, fact 2, 3, and 4, etc. And then fact N, the last one, in the paragraph, you can put in your outline transition statement. And I think our template file has transition statements in there. Maybe not. If not, we should add them. Does that make sense? So it's just a clear reminder, and it's just a simple box to check. Take half of the previous sentence and half of the first sentence of the next paragraph, stick them together and write that as a sentence. That's your transition sentence. You put them in that order for a reason, so it's not hard to write those. So, super long answer to your question. What do you do with a parenthetical citation at the end of a paragraph? That's what you do. Other questions at this point? That's a really good one, actually. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, the move from here is translating those bullet points into sentences. Really, really effective and better as separate passes through the document. So we were talking about editing passes, and you'd spend one scroll through the document looking for one thing. In this case, our first example was make sure there's a period at the end of the last sentence of each paragraph, because for whatever reason, a lot of people will start the next paragraph and just cut off that period. I have no idea why that is, but that is a consistent thing. And then, so you make it all the way through the document, and well, that's all fine. We got lots of paragraphs of everything. It's many, many pages long, and so on and so forth. We finish that check through, and then we go back to the top of chapter 1, and we look for the next thing. So are each of these, in this particular document, let's say the next thing we needed to do was we're using Microsoft Word's Works Cited or References section to be automatically generated. So every one of our citations, in order to be included in this list, you can see I've got the field codes, the automatically generated data for each citation highlighted in gray there. One pass through to just scan through for, and not even reading the document again, in this case, we'd search for the open parentheses character. And then for each time that we find it, and each time where it actually refers to or opens up a parenthetical citation instead of being part of like a parentheses in a mathematical formula, do we see that gray highlighting? And you're gonna miss none of those when you're going through and looking for one thing at a time. When you're trying to write and edit the document all at once, it's very, very common to lose your place, to miss something because you were looking for something else. So for each pass through, look for one thing. And yeah, it's a lot more scrolling that way, but it's a hell of a lot more effective, and it's a lot less energy and effort to do it that way sequentially instead of in parallel all at once. Humans, we're pretty good serial monotaskers. We're pretty good when we're concentrating on one thing, but when we're trying to look for these field codes in each thing, okay, hematoma's not one. That's all good. Oh, Carr and Sharma, all right. That is cited in the text as well, so we're good to go. Well, this one's an acronym, right? That's enough to check through the entire document, one thing at a time. So it's very useful to build that list as you are going of what are the things I'm going to check through. So a separate kind of side-by-side with your thesis proposal document, it's a good, it's usually anywhere from 2 to 4 pages, one line per thing to check. So first pass through, I wrote a note to myself, check for all of the periods at the end of the last sentence of each paragraph. Second line, check for all of my parenthetical references being field codes instead of just manually typed in so that they're going to get missed by the references generator. Third, I'm going to check for are all of my statistics, the non-Greek characters, are they all italicized? Whatever. And 2, 3, 4 pages of each of those passes. And when you encounter any of those as you write, just write that reminder to yourself to make that pass for that thing, whatever it is, and then forget about it. And keep on doing the writing so that you can focus on one thing at a time. Do that serial monotasking. You and I, we all have really, really high clock speed, single-threaded CPUs, if you're a computer nerd. We can't juggle a lot of things mentally all at once. We can't even juggle 2 things very well mentally all at once. But we can do extremely high efficiency throughput and high accuracy throughput doing exactly one thing. Okay, so less on what to write and more on how to write it effectively and efficiently.
Is there a way to mass import references into Words manually?
Not that I'm aware of. But plugins like EndNote and Zotero have pretty good import tools. For Microsoft Word, if it exists yet, I haven't found it. This is a great time to be alive because Microsoft just last week announced major AI tool workflows getting integrated into Word and Excel and stuff like that. And like ChatGPT-4 and stuff like that, these big language models are really good at parsing stuff like free-form text like a citation and figuring out what correctly to do with it. So that's coming, but it's not there yet. So yeah, for when I'm doing citations, this particular document used a Zotero plugin, which I don't have installed on this computer. But yeah, that's a thing. So the built-in citation editor is by hand, one by one. All right. But I do think we have a site license to EndNote if you want to use that. It's expensive, so don't get hooked on it. But
Yeah, that's pretty well.
okay, right on. All right, so steps from here. You are in process on writing the prose, it sounds like. So the next step for us is going to be to essentially open up PowerPoint and in brief, either copy paste or recreate this outline that you have on the left-hand side as the outline view for Microsoft PowerPoint, and then each top level bullet in the PowerPoint outline is going to be a new slide. And so that is a very, very quick and no extra typing kind of a way to get the content in order and in hierarchy into PowerPoint. And it's super basic formatting. It's nothing fancy, but it's very, very efficient. And efficiency is what we're looking for here, so that your brains are freed up to do your work instead of essentially reformatting the writing of your thesis proposal into a presentation style format. So let's see, the way that we do that is we want an outline view. So in Mac, I went to the view part of the ribbon right there and switched from normal view to outline view. And so type that in or copy paste in the outline level format, and if you hit enter, this is slide 2, hit enter again, and then if you hit tab to indent slide 2 content. So you can see where if you already have a hierarchical layout of stuff here, or in the outline level draft that you've been turning into the prose, the paragraph, sentences, and paragraphs level draft of your proposal, you can translate this in. This is going to be slide 1. This is going to be slide 2. This is going to be the first bullet point on slide 2. This will be the second bullet point on slide 2, third, and so on and so forth. And as you go further down in outline levels, let me show you what that looks like and how to translate that in PowerPoint. Then we have the following situation. So slide 2 content 1, slide 2 content 2, and then in our source document we had a further indent from each of these sections down into data analysis, which has its own subsections. What that's going to do in PowerPoint is the following. So that would be like slide 2 indent 1. Okay? What you can do there is where a subsection or section has its own sub-members, we don't want to have more than 6 or 7 pieces of information on any particular slide at once. That's too busy. We'll talk more about science communication stuff coming up. But the short version is we're going to take this and we're going to de-dent it. So Shift Tab turns that into its own new slide. And everything is still in order. Everything is still in hierarchy. We just have a way to translate things without copy-pasting your entire presentation over, and without having to copy paste like sentences over and then edit those sentences down to bullet points that are more functional for PowerPoint. If you have sentences on slides in PowerPoint, you're going to start reading those sentences, and it's boring, as the youth say, AF. So don't do that. Put no more than 6 or 7 pieces of information. So that's like a table with a title and 2 columns and 3 rows, right? 6 cells of information and a title, 7 total pieces of information on a slide. And that way you don't have to edit those sentences down, because the bullet level outline stuff is already good enough for the layout and structure of your PowerPoint. Make sense? Cool. So no new writing for your PowerPoint is the goal. 0. And then to the extent that you have things like sitemaps or procedure photos of like installing the WASP hub or something like that, each of those gets its own slide as well, and there's no writing to do on those slides because there's no text better than an image. Image is worth 1,000 words, right? So far, so good? All right, cool. So let's put some parameters on our need to get across the finish line at the end of the semester for both your proposal and for a presentation of it. And there's nothing like a deadline. So at the end of the semester, like the very end of the semester, let's carve out one or a couple of class sessions to do the following. I'm going to have about a 20-minute, 25-minute presentation to your classmates, to me, to your research group if they want to come, and so forth. And with that, it's going to be the whole thing. Intro, literature review, methods, if you really want to, anticipated results, that one in square brackets because that's really pretty optional, and then of course references. You always cite your work no matter what format it's in, or cite the work of others in your work. And then, if you're feeling froggy, supplemental slides in your deck. That's anywhere from an acknowledgements or a thanks slide for anybody who's helping you with your work in your research group, or saying thanks to my family for moral support or whatever, if that's a thing, to things like additional sitemaps that just are kind of clogging up your methods section, and they would take too long to have them all in there, but it's nice to have them if anybody asks a question about it. So we'll get into the kind of the detailed format and some tips like no more than 5 to 7 bits of information per slide and so forth. What kind of font to use, how many fonts to use, how much color do we use, how much reliance on patterns versus color do we use to distinguish different kinds of information in, like graphs, for example. Do we have things that are different colors on a clustered column chart? For somebody who's colorblind, that color change doesn't mean anything. So it's very hard for someone with like total achromia to interpret your graph, just to read it in the first place. So add some patterns like hash marks on one color and not on the other. So somebody who sees in grayscale can still see what's going on. So far, so good? Okay. So if we have 20 minutes per presentation and about 50 minutes per class session, that is 2 people per class session for presentations, and that'll be a total of 2 class sessions for 3 students. It's up to you guys. I don't really mind one way or the other. We can do all 3 of us during exam week, because we have a longer, I think, 2-hour class session for that if we want to take it. Exam week is typically pretty busy for grad students. You know, you're out doing fieldwork much more intensively by that point, usually. So we can carve out the last 2 class sessions, or we can go into the exam session. Do you guys have any preference on that? I don't have any preference one way or the other. You're not going to impress me or whatever either way. So.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, is there like other stuff that we have to do in those last couple of classes other than those presentations?
That's it. That's the thing.
I mean, I'd rather not have anything to do during exam week.
Okay. Perfect. Last class session?
I'm good with anything.
Cool. So easy going. All right. Then we will plan on the last 2 class sessions. So it'll be the Tuesday and Thursday of our final week of classes, and we'll pretty well go from there. Does that? Let's see. If you have any particular preference, if anybody would like to go first, or if you really like to hang back and let somebody else go first and go on the second day, that's fine either way. We have plenty of space for everybody, but now's a good time to start locking that stuff in so we know what to expect and what to work toward. Any preference on first day or second day?
I'll do first day.
First day it is. Okay. Cool. And good either way?
I'll do first day.
All right. Well, there you go. All right.
I think I'm a little confused on what exactly I would put in the lit review part of the presentation.
Sure. Okay.
I guess just to what depth of information, or do I put in every single little section of my lit review in there, or only what's
Great question. Okay.
directly?
So, yeah, just like with theses and dissertations, we'll have some examples up on the course website to look through. But the sense there is, you usually want to spend, you've got about 20 minutes, you want to spend about 5 minutes on introduction, context, scope, history of the problem, geographic area, and so forth. About 5 minutes typically on literature review. And then about 10 minutes on methods and anticipated results for a proposal type talk. And that sums to about 20 minutes. Most conference presentations are usually on the order of 12 to 18 minutes. So this is a little bit more permissive. You can kind of ramble on a little bit more for a minute here versus in a professional format, but it's close enough that you can kind of tweak speed up and down on the fly for that and translate this directly to a conference style presentation. But in a conference style presentation, usually you're presenting the results as well, in which case you'd spend like 1 to 2 minutes on intro, 1 to 2 minutes on lit review, because most of the people in the room at a professional conference, they wrote these papers that you're citing, or they also at least know of these studies and these efforts and so forth. Just a very little bit of time on the methods if they're generally standard, and then, the lion's share, half or more, on results and discussion of. That's where the interesting, exciting stuff is. So, for the literature review, for our purposes, 5 minutes, and get into as much detail as you can without speeding up how quickly you're talking. So that's kind of a strange backwards way of defining how much detail to go into that is not content driven. Because everybody's got a bunch of interesting stuff going on in their lit review. It's interesting, that's why you cited it. So the decision factor comes into how many of these previous studies can I talk about, prioritizing them in order of importance, and some of the least important ones are just going to fall off the bottom of the list because I got 5 minutes. And that's a reasonable amount of time to spend on it and no more. So with that, we would take a sense of typically 2 to 3 studies. Again, there's no magic number, but with 5 minutes, a minute to a minute and a half per crucial study that you are basing your work on is a good kind of rule of thumb. Each slide is going to be anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So it's not a lot of slides, and you typically have 1 slide per thing that you're relying on. So that's a couple of slides for about 5 minutes or so, or less if you want to prioritize other things more. Okay? Cool. So this is something to just kind of file away. We'll have some in the intervening weeks, some chances to look at some good PowerPoint presentations so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We'll look at some pretty bad PowerPoints so you can learn from their fail. And we'll keep on writing, okay? This is how the sausage gets made, one thing at a time. Most important thing next, Start now. Got it? All right, cool. Let's end right there. I think we're a minute over, so yeah.